I think we have the appropriate panel here to discuss what's happening with the Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan. There's actually a little bit of a debate as to whether or not it is an environmental disaster, and we'll kind of hash that out. But before we do so, let's take a look at the video with more details.
The operator of Japan's crippled Fukushima nuclear plant says around 300 tons of highly contaminated water has leaked into the Pacific Ocean. This comes after months of denial by the Tokyo Electric Power Company. Pacific neighbours South Korea have demanded an explanation from the Japanese authorities. We can say that we have discovered a radiation level strong enough to give someone a 5-year dose of radiation within 1 hour. We would like to apologise for the concern we have caused people. TEPCO has come under fire from its own government for its handling of the nuclear crisis. Fukushima was wrecked by the twin earthquake tsunami in March 2011.
Now, there are two issues at play here. First is a plume basically carrying this radioactive material, and Slate had a very lengthy article arguing that this isn't really that big of a deal. Obama's scientific advisors studied this issue, and they found that, well, there has to be specific wind patterns, and those wind patterns don't exist, and as a result, people do not have to evacuate Tokyo. But I think that the jury is still out on that, and we'll hash that out a little bit. Another issue is radioactive material basically leaking into our ocean, and some studies indicate that the ocean actually isn't large enough to dilute the amount of radioactive material that's leaking into the Pacific. So we'll discuss that a little bit as well. But Lucas, I want to start off with you. I mean, what are your thoughts with the current situation with this Fukushima nuclear plant, and is it as dangerous as people are making it out to be?
Well, I think, it's in the United States, we tend to talk about things in relation to us. So, people talking about should we evacuate California, leave the West Coast, I think that's a little hyperbolic. But I think for people who live in any of the affected areas around there, this is hugely damaging both environmentally and economically. I mean, you got whole towns of people that are basically having to have their houses decontaminated. I was reading an article. It takes about 2 days and 20 people to decontaminate one house, and you got to remove the topsoil all around. You have to hose down the house, and you have to take all of that water now because that's contaminated, and that all has to be stored. So you're generating hundreds of tons of waste that have to basically be kind of segmented off. And this is, this is an incredibly time-consuming and expensive process. So I think from that, what we should take away is that we need to learn the lessons of Fukushima and hopefully avoid having these kinds of things happen here, because we have a lot of nuclear power plants as well, exact same designs as Fukushima.
Yeah, so Fukushima, I love that you make that point, because we do have the same issue here in the United States. And considering all the extreme weather that we've been dealing with, is it far-fetched that we could have a similar type of meltdown here in the United States? Andrea?
No, it's not at all. In fact, they just closed San Onofre power plant a few months ago, which is fantastic, but it's been leaking for 14, 15 years. And they said, well, you'd have to surf there every day in order to be really exposed to it. Well, plenty of people do. But it also has, it's in the middle of a huge population center. So, I mean, granted, we all need power, we all use power, but this is a very expensive and risky sort of power in my mind. Because already in the US, there's 108 contaminated, unusable sites that haven't been cleaned up, that are supposed to be cleaned up by 2025. Good luck with the government shutdown getting that done, among other things. But it's, to me, the cost of the research alone for nuclear could have covered this country in wind turbines. It's not an effective use of money. And then now solar is up 20% this year, wind is up 15% this year. That's the direction we should be moving in.
So renewable energy is definitely a direction that I'd like to see the country go, and not just our country, but every country. The way that we're doing things right now obviously is not sustainable. But Rob, do you think that politicians here in the United States have learned any lessons at all with what happened with Fukushima?
No, of course not. Why would they? There's no reason for them to learn any lessons because it happened over there, not over here. And we have the sort of whitewashed EPA, oh, don't worry about it, it should be fine, which is really a way of saying we have no idea, but we don't want anyone to panic. Just to expand a little bit on what Andrea said about San Onofre, San Onofre could be shut down by a 6-foot-high wave. Would have shut down exactly the same problem that Fukushima had, would have overwhelmed all the fail-safe systems they had, which could come from just a really heavy storm. So we know that all these systems that we have in place that are supposedly fail-safe clearly are capable of failing wherever they are. And I think all of this goes to the bigger problem with nuclear and how it's different from wind and solar, which is that nuclear is part of our whole too-big-to-fail mentality that we have in this country. Nuclear is the perfect paradigm for it in terms of energy. These are giant systems that are impossible to manage, impossible to guarantee will be safe, and are beloved because they're incredibly expensive, require enormous amounts of subsidy, make certain people very, very wealthy, and those people in turn are paying the people who are supposed to be regulating them to make sure that it keeps going on.
So this isn't really a topic that I've seen covered in the mainstream press at all. I mean, this is something that we're talking about on this show. Hopefully, if we're lucky, 3,000 people will see this conversation. And I think that part of the reason why we don't push for renewable energy is because that type of topic doesn't really get covered in the press. And do you think that, I'm going to start off with you, Lucas, do you think that this is the kind of topic that the American people will understand? Because understanding how a nuclear plant operates is essential in understanding this story.
Well, I think that's a key point right there, in that if communities understand the risks of a nuclear power plant, they will never allow one to be built near them. So inherent to building nuclear plants is the need to kind of muddy the waters around, oh, you know, the safety is totally solid, you're never gonna have to worry about it. Because if you're actually honest with people about the risks that they may be facing, like the surrounding cities and towns in Japan that have been affected or completely, you know, evacuated, or ghost towns now, you'll never allow one to be built. So there's a sort of wolf in sheep's clothing aspect to the entire industry, where it's deceptive from the beginning, I think, because they're not going to be upfront about the devastating numbers behind, you know, what would happen should there be a meltdown. And, you know, as they were saying, San Onofre, I mean, you're talking about one of the most populous regions in the United States would essentially, if there was a major meltdown there, have to all be evacuated. You lose most of LA. I mean, it's
San Diego.
Yeah.
LA needed to start over anyway.
Yeah.
No problem.
Well,
So how do you bring attention to this story in a way that actually speaks volumes to people, not just Americans, but people worldwide? I mean, do you bring up what it's doing to our seafood, what it's doing to our resources, how it's messing up our environment? I mean, we have this whole climate change issue, and no one really wants to do anything to change our behavior. You have some environmentalists that want to do something, but I mean, a nuclear meltdown in Japan seems so abstract and so, dare I say it, unimportant to most people. So how do you cover this story and talk about it in a way that makes them realize the weight of the issue? Andrea.
Maybe it's the kind of thing where it's NIMBYism, not in my backyard syndrome. I mean, Japan's not in our backyard, but it's in the world's backyard. Now the Pacific Ocean is bringing this plume wherever it's going to end up. And it's not just affecting people, it's affecting life. I mean, that's a huge source of life and a food source for a lot of people. So given that, you do have to make it personal. Maybe it does have to be in your backyard or not in your backyard. Or you have to say, oh my God, this fish it's a big tuna and it's going to carry some radioactive material in it. Maybe it's not an option for me anymore. I think you have to make it personal because generally it's just too big and scary of an issue. It's something that happened a couple of years ago. It's still happening. We weren't told just how bad it was continuing to be, nor was the Japanese government apparently. So this is something that's going to continue, and the fact it's not getting coverage is not surprising to me because a lot of people don't want to hear this kind of bad news, and it's also because I can't do anything about it. You know, what am I, homeowner in California, supposed to do about this? I don't know.
Nuclear was a huge mistake, period. It didn't work out. It seemed great in 1955. It's been 40 years that it's existed, or 50 years that it's existed, and it didn't work out. We can't build them safely. The people who build nuclear power plants are the low bidders. That's the person who pours all the cement. The low bidder got that job. The cement's a little too thin. Too bad. We'll find out about that 30 years later. I grew up in western Massachusetts near Yankee, which is one of the oldest nuclear power plants in the country, which was decommissioned about 20 years ago. That plant has been leaking forever and will continue to leak. It will never be cleaned up. It was a mistake. Nuclear was a mistake. We have better options. We have solar, we have wind, solar thermal, even maybe, natural gas, you could argue, both sides, but all of those are clearly better options than nuclear, and we should just bury nuclear. And it's really unfortunate that James Hansen actually has recently come out pro-nuclear, and people have been talking about, I think our executive producer, Steve, circulated, or Malcolm may have circulated a piece about these new kinds of nuclear plants that are being pitched to us, that they're safe and they're good. It's bullshit.
So how do we convince politicians to push for renewable energy, especially when we have moron Republicans who act as if renewable energy is not the right way to go about it when it comes to creating jobs? They always go to the jobs issue.
We become billionaires. As
right.
soon as we become billionaires, we can affect all kinds of change with politicians. Until then, it's going to be very hard.
I think you're never going to fix morons or that issue. But I think the way to talk about it, the environmental aspect will definitely appeal to some people. But I think the biggest way to talk about it is the cost, because there's enormous subsidies that basically are responsible for prolonging this industry. And I think, subsidies at the outset of a new technology are great. We want subsidies to encourage innovation, but we don't want them to institutionalize failure. And that's basically what they've done here. Everything from the grants to build these, to decommissioning them, to handling the spent fuel, which is a huge problem. I mean, you got spent fuel pools at all of the reactors in the United States that are just sitting there because there's nowhere to put them. And actually, the federal government has to start paying operators for basically holding on to that spent fuel. So I think if you could talk about it in the context of how much it costs us, because that's kind of that's the framework that everyone wants to talk in now is cutting costs and everything. I think we need to talk about how much this costs taxpayers. And to Rob's point, that basically the operators are the only ones benefiting from this, and they're not assuming any of the risk, especially for a meltdown too. I mean, you can't get private investment for these, you can't get private insurance for these. They are wholly dependent on government subsidies. So I think that's the way to kind of attack that.
All right. Andrea, last question goes to you. On the grand scheme of things, how would you rate this nuclear issue that we have? I mean, when you consider mining for coal, when you consider fracking, drilling for oil, I mean, how bad is are these nuclear programs?
Well, look, it's part of the energy puzzle that we have in this country and worldwide. You can follow the German model, which is to say, no more. We're not doing this anymore. And in fact, Germany's not really known for its sunshine, and 50% of its energy comes from solar on certain days, good days. So if they can do it, come on, we can do it. It is something of the past. It is something of the 50s. I don't think it's something that needs to continue. And the biggest issue for me is that one we never talk about, which is what happens at the end? It all goes into some mountain in Nevada and we forget about it, but transporting it there is dangerous. There's coastal commissions that won't let you move it. There's terrorism issues around uranium. I mean, there's all sorts of things to think about.
There's a fault that runs under Yucca Mountain.
Big old fault. Yeah, so I think it's an outmoded energy source. It's great while it lasted, perhaps in theory, but in practice it is not. We have the technology to go beyond it now.